So this is part 4 of my ownership lecture, and it concerns governance strategy. In number 3, I were giving a repetition, I hope, on the function of the share markets, focusing on the share as such, what it can contribute with as organized through the share market. Now we will instead go to the governance strategy of a owner, which means that we are coming closer to the owners. So, governance strategy. That is, you could ask the question, owners, are they the same? Could we assume that all owners are the same? They are identical. As I said in the last part, we cannot assume it because there are differences in how individuals and organizations assume the cost of information, assume the cost of competence, and they have different preferences. So of course, the most realistic assumption is that no, owners are not like the birds to the left. It's a high level of homogeneity. It's that they are the same. If they would have been the same, there would be no competition on the stock market. There will be no quarrel, no conflict between owners. We have instead a heterogeneity. And this thing is what I'm telling now is based on several articles that I've done, but maybe most the one that you have on this course is the paper I did together with my then PhD student Julia Ponomareva and 2 students, Ottosson and Sundberg, called Governance Strategy and Cost, that you can find in the Journal of Management and Governance. Owners, yes, they are different. Why are they different? Well, they differ because of capacity. They have the capacity to gain information, the capacity to use the information, that is the competence, and then also they differ in preferences, but they differ also in governance costs. Some owners can influence the corporation more easily than others. They can assume costs of influencing, others cannot. So governance cost is something that you have to consider, but the most important thing in capacity of owners is the information and the competence. As I've told you, I have shares in a steel corporation. I have no capacity as owner because I do not have the information. I do not have the competence, and my governance costs are extreme in order to try to influence. But then we also have to look at what is preferences. That is the interest of the owner. Because an owner have an interest in their investment in the corporation, and there is a strength of interest. Of course, that is correlated mainly to the investment you have made. If you have made a lot of capital investment in a corporation, if you invest a lot of your competence in this corporation, you tend to have a strong interest in this corporation. And then also the direction of the interest, that is a little bit more about preferences. What would you like to have in this corporation? What is your ideal strategy of a corporation? That is the direction of the interest. And the direction of the interest, that is really what then create the efficiency of a corporation, because you as an owner, you would like your interest to be satisfied, and you have the corporation that satisfy your interest. That is the efficiency of a corporation. But taken together, the case that owners differ in interest, they differ in capacity, that means that owner 1 is not identical to owner 2, and that means that there is a conflict between those owners. They can solve it through destroying each other. One buys the other share ownership, or they go into negotiation and find out a common way to act. Owners have capacity to influence the corporation through different governance mechanisms. Governance mechanisms, that's really foundation of corporate governance. Those are the structures and the processes that influence the direction of the corporation. I will not dwell so much into it because we really don't have time to develop the idea of governance mechanism. But governance mechanism, structures, processes that influence the corporation. One of these is capital, of course, both debt capital and equity capital. Those influence the corporation. Managerial labor influence the corporation. Who you will recruit as a CEO or at the top management team influence how the development of the corporation will be. For example, there is a theory saying that if you tend to recruit people at the top management level that have a finance orientation, of course, then you get the finance orientation of the strategy of the firm. Or the other way around, if you would like to have more of finance orientation of the corporation, you recruit people with this finance orientation. And of course, one would say that the best thing for a corporation to implement the will of the owner is that you recruit a person that think exactly the same as you are as an owner. Then you don't need to control the manager. Executive compensation is considered to be a very important part of corporate governance. How you compensate the executives will influence their interest, because we assume that people do not act because of a duty. They don't act because it's right to act in this way. They act because they can earn something from it, and therefore you have to have earnings connected to the correct action. That is the executive compensation. The board of directors are the ones that have the responsibility to create the strategy of the firm and to hire and fire a CEO. Auditors, they are the ones that are monitoring the accounting system and the accounting information, making sure to a certain level that the accounting information that is presented to external stakeholders are reasonably correct. We have the strategy and structure of the firm in order to control a corporation. If you can create a strategy that is very simple to monitor and evaluate, then you have gained a lot of control. The structure, if it's an easy structure to understand, it's good for the owners. And of course, you have the product market. That is the ultimate control of a corporation. If they perform well at the product market, then of course, then obviously it's quite efficient. If they don't, they are not efficient. And then there is part of the environment, for, as I told you, journalists, for example, the business press influence the corporations. These are the different mechanisms. Some of them are quite available for owners to manipulate: executive compensation, the board, even auditors. Not saying that the auditors are corruptible, but you can influence their work through giving them more or less audit fee. And of course, strategy and structure is quite accessible for an owner that is represented on the board of directors. Then part of the environment, maybe you cannot control, or you should not be able to control journalists, at least not in a country like Sweden. But these are the governance mechanisms, and why I've talked about them, I will tell you now. Because governance strategy, that is an idea that owners have a governance. Every specific owner have a specific governance strategy, and that is a praxis-oriented view of corporate governance. Praxis means that it's considering what owners actually are doing. So the definition of a governance strategy is that it's design of individual corporate governance mechanism, of the specific ones, equity, board of directors, for example, and it's also the design of the mix of the corporate governance mechanism. We always have to realize that we have different mechanisms, but as an owner, you can influence all of them. Therefore, you create a mix of these corporate governance mechanisms. And that is made by an owner in order to ensure the fulfillment of the main stakeholders' objectives, because it's the stakeholders that define what they would like. That is the interest of the stakeholder, of the shareholder especially. And then they would like to have these interests satisfied. That is the fulfillment of the stakeholder objectives. So governance strategy is individual owners designing individual corporate governance mechanisms and mix of corporate governance mechanisms in order to make sure that their interest is satisfied through the corporation. And here is a reference to an article where, if you would like to read more specific of governance strategy, that is the place in this article. But it's if you would like only a small introduction of governance strategy, it's enough with the reference I gave you before. Here is the overall model of governance strategy. It's a little bit maybe complicated, but we have talked about most of the thing. In the very center is the principal. The principal, that is the owner. Or most of the case, it's the owner or the dominant stakeholder. The principal, the one that have the capacity to influence the governance mechanism of the corporation and therefore the corporation. The principal have capacity as a principal with this information, the competence, and then the governance cost. And it has also the interest, the strength of the interest, and the direction of the interest. Through this capacity of the principal and the interest of the principal, they create the governance strategy, and the arrow goes to the governance mechanism, trying to influence the specific governance mechanism and the mix of the governance mechanism. Of course, we have also the agent. A CEO is not a non-powerful person, it's quite a powerful person, and the top management team is also powerful, so they will also try to influence the governance mechanism. So maybe you could say there is a negotiation between agent and principal how to influence the corporate governance mechanism. And then overall, I've written property rights and exogenous forces, because property right, that means that there are not, this is trying to create a model that is not only applicable on corporations, but also on other organizational forms. I've used it in order to explain the development of riding schools, and they are not organized as corporation, but as voluntary organizations. And there are exogenous forces, legislation and these things influencing the governance strategy. And these governance mechanisms influence the corporate entrepreneurship. I have added corporate entrepreneurship because corporate entrepreneurship is how you develop your corporation and how you try to be adjusted to the market and how you try to exploit the markets in order to create a performance of the firm. Because when we talk about corporate governance, we tend to always talk about disciplining people. It's always about control or monitoring, discipline. But corporate governance is not about how you control people. Corporate governance is really about how you make people with the capacity to develop the corporation so it creates the performance that you would like to achieve through your corporation. So never forget corporate entrepreneurship, trying to make people giving the capacity to develop the corporation in the right direction, therefore you have the discipline, but still to develop it. The corporate entrepreneurship creates the performance of the corporation, and performance, that is related to the direction of the interest of the principal. And that is what is called efficiency. So efficiency, you always have to remember, efficiency is the fulfillment of the interest of the principal. Performance is not profit. It's not market share. It's not the largest house in the world. No, performance that creates efficiency is the one that is adjusted and fit to the direction of the interest. So if you have a corporation, for example, I believe that in the example of IKEA, profit was not the goal of IKEA. Profit was a mean to achieve the goal of the founder, of the entrepreneur, to give people furniture that they could afford. So when you do an analysis of corporate governance, if you don't ask yourself, start with trying to find out who is the principal and what is the interest of the principal. That you need to start with, because if you can understand the principle, if you can understand what is the interest of the the principle, then you can understand what is the relevant performance. If you start assuming just, oh, it's a profitability, then you are on the wrong track. You start your analysis of corporate governance. What is the interest of the main stakeholders? Because that is what will influence the governance strategy and therefore the performance of the firm. When I've done study of this governance strategy, I found that you can say there are induced hypotheses. In one study, we found the beast proposition, and that's saying exogenous influence puts a demand on the force with which the principal uses the mechanism. The mechanism, if exogenous influence, that is, if you are in a very tough market competition, then you have to be very tough yourself. Then you have to be very strong, and therefore you are very strong in the use of the mechanism. If you are in a very weak market, if you have monopoly, then it doesn't matter what you're doing with the mechanism because you will survive because you have a monopoly. So you are very weak in your use of the mechanism. This beast proposition I got from a professor in Phoenix, Arizona. I was visiting this university and University of Arizona. And then I said that, now I'm going out in the desert and walk around. And he said that, well, be aware of the animals. He meant scorpions. Because those animals, they are living in a very tough environment. Therefore, they are very tough. That is the beast proposition. Then we had the orchestra proposition. That is saying that if you have a limited capacity to mix many mechanisms, that will induce stronger emphasis on the available mechanism. If you have access to all the mechanisms, then you can create a beautiful orchestra. But if you only have one or two of the instruments, then those instruments have to be harder when you use it. I used it when I did a study about riding schools. In the riding school, they are poor. They cannot, executive compensation is a non-existing issue for them. They cannot pay. So they don't have access to equity. They cannot lend money. So it's really hard to influence the stable manager. But there are other ways to influence, for example, through a strong board of directors. So therefore, in riding schools, you expected the board to have a high capacity to influence the corporation. And then the third induced hypothesis says that when owners are influencing the governance, there is this momentum of a mechanism, because utilization of a mechanism could be due to the momentum of the mechanism, constituting an investment for other aims, but available for the uses of governance. That is because those mechanisms that we are talking about, they are not only ways of governing the corporation. For example, equity is a way of financing the corporation also, not only governing the corporation. Strategy is a way to address a market. It's not only a mean of influencing the corporation. Therefore, you have this simultaneous influence that you do it. You increase the equity because you would like to assume more risk in a market, but that means also that there is more equity, so you get the more control of the corporation. But these are only induced hypotheses. The main thing, the most important thing with governance strategy is saying that there are different kind of owners. They differ because of different characteristics, and they will create different setups of governance mechanism, which is the governance strategy, and that will influence the entrepreneurial action and the performance of the corporation. So that was governance strategy. Now let's go to the owners.